Coming up on the program today, the UN's Environment Programme says national plans to cut carbon fall far short of what is needed to avert dangerous climate change. Powerful cyclone hits the southern Italian island of Sicily, causing widespread flooding in Catania. Plus, Sudan's top general Fattah al-Burhan defends the army's seizure of power. Welcome to the program, everyone. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. The UN's Environment Programme has painted a rather bleak climate picture for the world, saying that despite national plans to cut carbon, it would still not be enough to avert dangerous climate change. This is contained in the agency's emissions gap report, which suggests the world is on course to warm around 2.7 Celsius with hugely destructive impacts. It does, however, say there is hope that if long-term net zero goals are met, temperatures can be significantly reined in. Now, in its 12th year, the emissions gap report looks at the nationally determined contributions or carbon cutting plans countries have submitted to the UN ahead of COP. These pledges run up to 2030 and have been submitted by 120 countries. UNEP has also taken account of other commitments to cut warming gases not yet formally submitted in an NDC. In another development, Australia says it will target net zero carbon emissions by 2050, but will not legislate the goal and will instead rely on consumers and companies driving emission reductions. This was made known by Prime Minister Scott Morrison. The adoption of the target will ease international criticism of Australia, which had earlier refused to join countries such as Britain and the United States in pledging zero emissions by 2050 ahead of the United Nations COP26 climate conference in Glasgow from later this month. Morrison said Australia, one of the world's largest emitters of greenhouse gases on a per capita basis and a major exporter of fossil fuels such as coal, will achieve its net zero target largely through technology development, with government investing a total of $20 billion.
Plan gets Australians want action on climate change. They're taking action on climate change, but they also want to protect their jobs and their livelihoods. They also want to keep the cost of living down, and they also want to protect the Australian way of life, especially in rural and regional areas. The Australian way of life is unique. Australians want a plan that gets the balance right. And our plan to reach what will be our new official target of reaching net zero emissions by 2050, our plan gets the balance right. Our plan charts a uniquely Australian way that recognises the challenges. The world is changing, and the world's response to climate change is changing the world. It is changing the global economy.
British naturalist David Attenborough has added his warning to world leaders on the dangers of tackling climate change too late if a UN climate summit in Scotland later this month does not succeed, saying it would be catastrophic if nations fail to support poorer ones and the time is running out. Britain has cast the United Nations COP26 climate conference, which begins in Glasgow on October 31st, as the last big chance to slow rising temperatures and hopes to persuade leaders to adopt tougher climate targets.
And I think it would be really catastrophic if the developed nations of the world, the more powerful nations of the world, simply ignored these problems. Do we say, oh, it's nothing to do with us and because our arms? We caused it on a world scale. When is it too late? But it's difficult to see. If we don't act now, it will be too late. And we've been saying that for a long time. And we're saying, well, what do we mean by now? And we've said, well, in the next 10 years or something. And think, oh, well, 10 years' time, that's a couple of budgets away, and you know, politicians won't do things. We have to do it now.
The VOA's science correspondent Steve Baragona is in Washington. Steve, all eyes are on that Glasgow summit next week. So leaders are making commitments to net zero carbon emissions. But the fear here is how soon do they begin, to cut these emissions, and how soon will the rest of the world begin to feel the changes, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of concern, really, not only about how long it'll take before those the cuts kick in, but also how soon the pledges to pay for the transition will kick in. This is going to be a big issue in Glasgow. The wealthier nations made a commitment back in 2009 to put $100 billion per year towards helping developing countries to make this transition and adapt to the consequences of climate change. So far, none of that, well, they haven't met it. The best data that we have is from 2019, and it was about $79 billion that have been committed. There's a new plan that came out yesterday via the UK Secretariat that said, okay, we promise we'll get you your money by 2023. A lot of countries are saying not only is that not soon enough, but what are you going to do to make up the shortfall in the meantime? So this is the kind of issue that is leading to a real shortage of trust going into COP26.
Yeah, and Steve, there is so much bad news ahead, even beyond COP26, about the worsening impact of climate change and how temperatures are rising across the world, how it might be too late to make a difference. What more are you hearing about possible solutions to saving the planet?
Well, I think one of the big issues that's that's coming up is, okay, this idea that we're going to hit a 1.5 degree target. Like, this is the idea that we need to keep the planet from warming more than 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial temperatures. We're already at about 1 degree, 1.1 degrees or so. And the concern is that this idea that if we don't get to 1.5 soon enough, or don't stop at 1.5 soon enough, that's the end. And some of the folks that I'm talking to are saying, look, 1.5 is a target, but it's not a cliff. So people get to choose, humans, our societies get to choose how bad this gets. It's not the case that if we don't keep it below 1.5 that the world will immediately end. Things will continue to get worse. And how bad it gets will depend on how soon we stop emitting greenhouse gases. The sooner we do that, the better. We're already starting to see the impacts, and things are going to continue to get worse. But there is some consternation that making 1.5 degrees kind of the be-all, end-all is leading to a lot of kind of fatalism that, okay, we may not make it, but, then what? If we don't make 1.5 degrees, we still have to stop before we go any farther. So, the idea being that not making 1.5 the be-all, end-all, very good target to hit, but if we don't hit it, we still have to act.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that in perspective, because all of these messages of doom have made it seem like, the world ends, after 1.5 degrees Celsius, and if the world if temperatures continue to rise, and then we're all doomed. But what do we do in the meantime while we're waiting to hit 1.5?
I mean, the good news is that the cost of the ways to get ourselves out of this have gotten a lot cheaper. I mean, there are a lot of places in the world where solar power, wind power are actually the cheapest electron to add to the grid. You don't necessarily, in a lot of places, have to burn more coal to satisfy your energy needs. Now, the cost of solar, wind power have gotten to be so low that in some places it's actually cheaper to build new solar farms and new wind farms than it is to continue to burn coal and natural gas, which is great news. The problem is no one is acting fast enough on this, and the kind of the benchmarks are shifting. One of the good things that I've gotten out of reporting on this recently is that, okay, we are not to 1.5 degrees yet, but going into Paris, the world was looking at a planet that was set to warm 3.7 degrees. Going into Glasgow, we're looking at planet that's set to warm 2.7 degrees. Still too hot, but going in the right direction. If all of the countries that have pledged net zero actually follow through on their pledges, which is very much an open question, we're looking at closer to 2.2 degrees. Still too hot, but the direction is going in the right direction. And this was built into Paris, that there's a 5-year mechanism where every 5 years countries come back and update their pledges. This is the first year that since Paris, given a 1-year delay from COVID, that countries are coming back to the table with new proposals. These proposals are not enough. They will not be enough by the end of Glasgow, most likely, barring some miracle. But this is not the final opportunity. Is one of the things that I've heard from the folks that I have been talking to. We will be coming back again next year. We'll be coming back in 2023 for the global stock take. We'll be coming back again in 2025 and 2026 and 2027. I think there's a fear that the people will see Glasgow as the end of the road. And one person told me that Glasgow is an important step, but it's not the last step.
Yeah, Steve, really, thank you for putting things in perspective, because the expectations for Glasgow are really high. Hopefully those are realistic expectations. Steve, thanks again for joining us on the program.
Happy to be here.
The more visible impact of climate change, a powerful cyclonic storm has hit the southern Italian city of Sicily, causing widespread flooding around the city of Catania, turning streets and squares into rivers and lakes, and causing at least 2 deaths. A spokesperson for Misericordia group of volunteers who are helping police and firefighters say the body of a man was found under a car amid torrential rain sweeping the town of Gravina, north of Catania. Looking at the aftermath of those floods in Catania. And on Monday, a 67-year-old man died after his car was hit by rising waters and mud. His wife was still missing. The rain has inundated some of Catania's most famous streets and squares, causing a blackout in the city centre and flooding shops. Schools have been closed in the city, and a number of nearby towns have also been shut. The African Union plans to buy up at least 110 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines from Moderna Incorporated. Moderna is prepared to deliver the first 15 million doses to Africa later this year as part of an agreement facilitated by the White House. An additional 35 million doses will be delivered in the first quarter of 2022 and up to 60 million doses in the second quarter. All the doses are offered at Moderna's lowest tiered price. The company is also working on plans to allow it to fill doses of its COVID-19 vaccine in Africa in as early as 2023, in parallel to building an mRNA vaccine manufacturing facility in Africa. We'll have more on the situation around the world and other stories, plus what it's like stepping away from the royal family in Japan as a royal princess marries a court. Welcome back. We continue our monitoring of the COVID-19 situation in other countries. The UK, for example, has recorded another 263 deaths within 28 days of a positive test, as the highest daily figure since March 3rd. And then Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says COP26 will inevitably pose a risk of transmission of COVID-19. Here's more from the Global Update.
Hospitals in the southern region of Russia are fully loaded with COVID-19 patients as the country fights a new wave of the coronavirus infection. Officials say all the hospital beds have been taken as the hospital accommodates 450 patients, including 50 in the intensive care unit. Officials further add that the absolute majority of those admitted have not been vaccinated. Russia on Tuesday reported 1,106 COVID-19 deaths in the past 24 hours, the highest figure since the start of the pandemic, amid a surge in new cases that have prompted authorities to reimpose partial lockdown measures. China is aiming to provide 2 billion vaccine doses to the world. A senior Chinese official says China has so far provided more than 1.5 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses to 106 countries and 4 international organizations since the beginning of this year. There are aims to reach 2 billion by the end of the year and also provide $100 million to the international vaccine sharing scheme COVAX. State media have repeatedly stressed that China has the capacity to produce 5 billion vaccine doses annually. As the country has a population of 1.4 billion in theory, it only needs half of those. However, booster jabs are currently being rolled out in many major cities. Residents in the Greater Tokyo area, including Japan's capital city, Tokyo, are now enjoying restaurant sit-ins after government relaxed COVID-19 restrictions. The government reported a record low number of 82 daily coronavirus cases in the city since October 19 last year. Over 102,000 local restaurants, or 85% of the total number of dining establishments in Tokyo, are permitted to operate, with the outlets implementing antivirus measures such as using alcohol-based sanitizers and thermal cameras on patrons.
Let's check in on Sudan as the country's top general Abdel Fattah al-Burhan says the army ousted the government of Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok to avoid a civil war. He accused politicians of incitement against the armed forces and said Hamdok had not been harmed and had been brought to Burhan's own home. Soldiers arrested the Prime Minister and other members of his cabinet on Monday, and hours later, Burhan appeared on TV to announce the dissolution of the Sovereign Council, a body set up to share power between the military and civilians. The military takeover brought a halt to Sudan's transition to democracy 2 years after a popular uprising toppled ruling autocrat Omar al-Bashir. Now, Mali has expelled the ECOWAS regional bloc's representative in the country as pressure mounts on it to provide a final timeline on its transition to civilian rule. A statement on state-run ORTM TV says Hamadou Boli was summoned by the Foreign Affairs Ministry and notified of the government's decision, declaring him persona non grata in view of his actions that is described as incompatible with his status. Mali has been at loggerheads with the regional body over demands to hold elections in February. The West African nation was suspended from ECOWAS in May after the interim leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, carried out a second coup in less than a year. Prime Minister Choguel Maïga has indicated that the election could be delayed, citing concerns over credibility. Here in Nigeria, the UK's 6th Royal Navy ship, the HMS Trent, is in the country for a week of training exercises with the Nigerian Navy against piracy on the Gulf of Guinea before continuing their Africa tour to Ghana, the Gambia, Senegal and Cape Verde. Though the 2,000-ton HMS Trent arrived in Nigeria on Monday and docked at the Apapa port, the crew was welcomed on Tuesday by the British Deputy High Commissioner Ben Llewellyn-Jones, accompanied by the Deputy Defence Attaché from the UK's Ministry of Defence, Bobby Gillespie. Commanding officer of the ship, Tom Knott, was on hand to discuss the operation and further cooperation between the Nigerian and British Ministry regarding maritime security.
We're here for the week, so as we reach the end of this week, we'll be proceeding to sea to the immediate area to work alongside the Nigerian Navy and some of your other law enforcement agencies. So that starts us for this week, and then for the next 3 months, HMS Trent will be deployed to the Gulf of Guinea and West Africa region, where we will visit Ghana, the Gambia, Senegal and Cape Verde. And Senegal is where we'll host the G7++ Friends of Gulf of Guinea. There's a co-chair with Senegal, and that comes back to that last question about what are the broader avenues that we're exploring whilst we're in this region, rather than simply military and operational activity. The G7++ has 6 working groups which cover grounds such as financial support to the region, civil society, industry, so it's much broader than military activity, and we're playing our part in that as well. The training activity was your second question, and give you a feel for how this week will pan out. It's a broad range of activity from Royal Marine interdiction training, so our boarding team, who have got a search and seizure capability, so they'll be explaining exactly how they go about doing that. We'll be explaining how we operate a patrol vessel, which we think is ideal for this type of role, maritime security operations in coastal regions. We're a very much modular capability that means we can bolt on and bolt off pieces of capability that are fit for the task. And you'll see right now you're sat on the flight deck of the ship where, if required, we can embark a helicopter, which are essential for coastal operations as well.
Well, it's now official. Japanese Princess Mako has tied the knot with her college sweetheart, Kei Komuro. With this marriage, Princess Mako, who is the niece of the emperor, has given up her royal title and says she's determined to build a happy life with her irreplaceable husband after a tumultuous engagement. Mako, wearing a pastel dress and pearls, said goodbye to her parents, Prince Akishino and Princess Kiko, and her 26-year-old sister, Princess Kako, at the entrance to the imperial home. Though all wore masks in line with Japan's coronavirus protocol, her mother could be seen blinking rapidly as if to fight off the tears. Mako bowed formally to her parents, but her sister grabbed her shoulders and the two shared a long embrace. Mako and Komuro were married in the morning after an official from the Imperial Household Agency, which runs the family lives, had submitted paperwork to a local office registering their marriage. So now that she's no longer royal, she gives up her royal title, and she also gives up the over $1 million that she's supposed to receive on leaving the royal family. But she's, rejected all of that to become a commoner along with her husband. Japanese, however, don't understand this, probably don't even agree. 100 of them, the protesters, demonstrated on the streets of central Tokyo, holding placards and marching against Princess Mako getting married to a commoner. Many of them cite various alleged problems involving Kei Komuro and his mother as their reasons for not supporting the marriage, as they would not want the imperial family to be involved in crimes. Japan initially cheered the couple's engagement announcement 4 years ago, but things turned sour soon after when the tabloids reported on a money scandal involving Komuro's mother, prompting the press to turn on him and the marriage to be postponed. Komuro left Japan for law studies in New York in 2018, only to return in September 2021. The couple will not be holding any ceremonies or events for their marriage, and they will live in New York from now on, after Mako applies for the first passport of her life. That'll be all on the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.